So today's professional learning communities, right?
So we have a combination of overview, information about PLCs in general, and then our specific school information. So just a quick review for anyone watching who's not familiar with PLCs. PLCs across all grades and content areas consistently analyze data to target the needs. So key words within that we'll highlight a little bit later, but what I think a big picture is moving from conversations that are professional, but perhaps not specifically focused on what learners know and can do and how are we going to respond to that.
So I'm just thinking in terms of, because this most likely will be posted on the website, yes?
Yes.
And we're sitting here saying PLCs, but someone else might not. So maybe we need to say out loud what we're talking about. Is a PLC?
Sure.
And also, I'm thinking the door.
So PLC, Professional Learning Community. A group of people, a group of educators coming together for a specific purpose. And we will outline that a little bit as we go along. How is a PLC different from a team meeting, for example, is a common question, and one that I think we've all had to grow into an understanding of and are still growing in that understanding of. And this slide lists out some things that are characteristic of PLCs. So what is different about a PLC meeting versus any other meeting to collaborate or team? And I think Kelly said maybe that link is not active, but if anyone is interested in exploring and delving into further, the link she put in below has some great information. But here are 6 characteristics that are essential to make it a PLC versus any other kind of meeting. Some of these certainly would be the same for other types of meetings also, but some are more unique or more focused. So I won't read through it word for word, but being focused on common mission goals, obviously collaborating, but the collaborating focused on learning, not on what field trip we're going to take, not on what's going on at recess, although sometimes learning has to happen there, but focused on the learning. An inquiry process that is collective rather than individual. Being action oriented. So not just admiring the problem, but now what are we going to do? And a certain risk taking. So how are we going to experiment and try things together and then evaluate how they work and try to replicate successes? Commitment to continuous improvement. That's really both student progress, but also the team and how they're working together as a team, how they're functioning as an instructional unit. So continuous improvement in a lot of areas. And then results oriented. So not just going through things for the sake of doing them, but what are the results we can get from these meetings and actions.
So I'll jump in here just to talk about some of the specific areas that you might see a professional learning community sort of focusing on. And it can range, run the gamut of things, environments where learning can take place. So some of these things might be professional learning community discussions that collect and look at data around school climate or particular learner behaviors that we can then attempt different types of learning and interventions based on what the data is telling us. Social emotional well-being is an area where a PLC can focus, again, on support for learning for learners. A lot of it has been focusing around effectiveness of instructional material or what the impacts of different types of instruction are having on learner growth. Some groups have been looking at assessment fidelity, and you can look at how closely assessments are measuring targeted outcomes. Are there things that can be tweaked or adjusted in an assessment to better measure what we're looking for? Standardized assessment data is ripe for the PLC process, looking at, drilling down into the data and trying to get a better sense of, again, how learner achievement is being measured there and how instruction is sort of reaching those goals. Some teams use this to explore improvements in interdisciplinary units of study. The effectiveness of that, again, on specific learning targets, differentiation, personalization, the list could go on and on. Really, if you're doing anything that involves data and focus around improving learning in some capacity for a learner, it's probably ripe for a PLC discussion.
David, I can follow along where you source the data for most of those, but there's
We're starting at the sort of admin leadership level, looking at our full discipline data, for example, and looking at the curve of that data for specific infractions one way or the other. And if that's based, again, around that social emotional well-being piece, we can see system-wide, okay, we're seeing this increase, so there's, let's try some interventions, or decrease. And a good example would be when we had some really substantial drama in one of our grade levels in the middle school, and we're seeing an uptick in some of those sort of discipline infractions that are that lagging indicator of that. Our counseling team met, reviewed that data, and came up with a program of instruction that they implemented across actually the entire school. And we started to watch that curve bending, going down, and then it's ticking up again. So another round of intervention and down, down, down. So some of our sort of system-wide data that we get around discipline and attendance, we aggregate that and look at that to see if what we're doing is effective or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our other tool is our digital pass system.
Right.
So a lot of that is really a crossover with MTSSB.
Right.
And so I know at the elementary schools, our PLC team, certainly they address it, but it's really the MTSSB team, multi-tiered system of support and behavior and wellness, that is doing more of what you just described.
Which is really its own sort of version of PLCs at different
Right.
tiers too. So it's
Right.
all interwoven. One thing that we wanted to talk about, again, sort of defining what a professional learning community is to help better understand what it isn't. PLCs that are really operating effectively need some form of data that can be looked at to help drive the conversation and to help drive the types of instructional strategies or adjustments or things like that that the team will use, which means that the individuals using that data need skill in analyzing and using that data, which can then help to make decisions and things like that. And facilitation is really important because it's very easy, sort of like Susan said a few minutes ago, it's easy to get pulled into that. I remember how you phrased it, but celebrating the problem versus looking beyond that and getting to the place of solving a problem or looking at intervention. So that facilitation role is extremely important to keep the team focused and moving in a positive direction. And then we look at kind of a process on the next slide. What we generally see taking place in PLCs is that data review step first, which is pulling the relevant data for whatever it is that you're attempting to run the PLC around, reviewing that data to get the present status and set goals around that data. The team should then next do some sort of research, and I'm using that word loosely. I'm not talking about going into a library and pulling a zillion books and doing literature reviews, although you could do that, but usually it's more simple research designed to look at some best practices that could help address what the data is demonstrating, and then implementing some sort of an intervention or strategy and monitoring the impact, and then the cycle comes back around. You review the data again, look at where there's been improvements, look at where there's still some things that are lagging, and then restart the cycle to continue that growth. And at the center of that cycle is a continuous improvement for learners in terms of their outcomes in academic behavior, et cetera. And we're on sort of a 5-year timetable of rolling this out with immediate steps that we're going to talk about today, but a vision for down the road that we've been working on as sort of district-wide leadership team over the last couple of years, making sure that we have a good sense in our 5-year goals of how to get to the place where this becomes self-sustaining. So that this year has mostly been about the organization step, and you'll hear a lot about where each school is in its organization, for PLCs, and dipping toes in and using some rubrics and tools and things like that to really get the processes moving forward. Next year, the focus is really on building skills, looking at getting the current structures sort of firmed up, making sure that teams gain skill and data analysis and things like that, and narrowing the focus, and then consolidating and systematizing in the third year, and by the fourth year, having this self-sustaining, where it's just a core sort of part of how we collaborate in support of learners. And so we'll jump in and start with the middle high school, sort of where we're at, and then turn it over to Susan and Kelly for the elementary schools. So right now at the middle high school, in terms of structures, we have all of our teacher teams broken down by either content or grade level. And grade level is primarily the grades 6, 7, 8 core teams. All the other teachers in the building are broken into content teams to focus on, again, the PLC process. All of our teams, because of some careful scheduling, have a common planning time daily of 45 minutes. And at least 2, but as many as 4 days a week, that common planning time is being used for a PLC process. We have team leaders in place in our middle and high school teams whose responsibilities include setting the agendas, doing the facilitation for the meetings to sort of keep things on track, and making sure that the overall work of the PLC continues to move forward and doesn't get sort of mired in the weeds. And those team leaders also meet together as a group bi-weekly. In addition to other leadership pieces of the school, we always share out what is the progress of each team's PLC, are there things that teams need, and things like that to make sure that everyone across the building is sort of in the know about what's taking place to support learning. Our teams also have one PLC each week that's focused around a learner support model, which Kim will talk about in a little bit. At the previous meeting, we talked about how the middle high school is behind the curve on MTSSB right now, with some focusing on NEASC and things like that. This learner support PLC is our way of continuing to make sure we're supporting learner needs at the middle high school, but eventually the goal is to have that replaced by the more consistent MTSSB structure. We have some best practices that are sort of in place. We spent the last few years with our teams practicing a variety of protocols and sort of exposing the teams to what protocols look like and how they can be effective. Some of those have been implemented in particular teams this year. Some teams are looking for new ones based on their goals. All of our teams took some time to establish team norms that are consistent across all of the team members and help to facilitate their PLCs. All of our teams have divvied out specific roles in the PLC process, which is really important to making sure that there's a note taker who's consistent so they can continue to follow up on their work, to make sure that they're consistent on time, keeping on task, and things like that. And our teams are working generally to develop assessments, analyze evidence, and we'll talk more about that on the next page. Some of the examples of what our PLCs have been doing this first year, our grade 6 team has spent a lot of time analyzing evidence focused around the transition into middle school and some of the social, emotional, and peer sort of pieces. So reviewing with pre-assessment tools, even how learners understand things like socializing in a group, using digital technology appropriately, being connected to peers and collaborating. And with that pre-assessment data, which they designed in their PLC and then collected, they were able to identify some specific habits of mind primarily that they wanted to focus on for the transition to 6th grade, because it is such a different environment versus being in the elementary schools. And they were able to craft direct instruction lessons and deliver those and then measure outcomes on the other end with improvements to the 6th grade, which shows up interestingly in our sort of school-wide data, because the 6th grade discipline curve went like this and then went like this and is now amongst the lowest in the school because of a lot of their efforts of really getting in there with some of that support early on. Our grade 7 and 8 teams are both doing a PLC separately focused around standardized test scores and helping learners understand and set goals around those scores. So both of those teams started with a review of New Hampshire SAS and MAP data in the case of grade 7, and New Hampshire SAS and PSAT 8 data in the case of grade 8, and help the learners with some direct instruction on understanding those scores, drilling down, setting reasonable goals and thinking about how to use specific tools to improve their progress. And in grade 7, they've gotten really specific with helping the learners set those goals and attaching specific sort of benchmark rewards based on how the learners are processing through, and then supplying a lot of Moby Max time and direct instruction with remediation. And I'm happy to report that we just have been doing interim assessments, and there's a very obvious curve of growth this year. Already on the interim assessments, we're sort of beyond where we were on the summative assessments the prior year. So this is, again, playing out in real time, and they're seeing how their intervention steps are working, and they're going to continue that process through the rest of the year. High school English, focusing around how to take the learning goals that cross between different grade levels, which there's a lot of those in the English language arts learning progressions, and thinking about how one teacher can share with the next teacher the progress of learning on those goals without having that teacher restart every single year. So they've been researching some different tools, such as portfolios, that can capture that effectively and share that progress forward with other teachers. Our math team in the high school has been focusing again around PSAT and SAT data, looking for patterns. They have identified some holes in their assessment tools and some lack of alignment with SAT types of questions and the things that the SAT is assessing specifically, and have been refining both their instruction and their assessment practices already this year to fill some of those gaps. And this PLC process also has led that team to decide that they want to sort of go all in next year on a standards-based approach with grading and reporting and OTIS and things like that. So again, that was in the course of this PLC that they reached that next type of intervention. Social studies is working on, again, starting with PSAT, SAT data, saw a pretty large hole in informational text analysis and pulling evidence to support claims. So they've spent a lot of their PLC time creating a data bank together of primary sources and then crafting common lessons that uses that data bank. So learners have consistent, continuous practice pulling from those primary sources and informational text for supporting claims. I'm going to ask Heather to talk about science because I know you've done a lot of work with them, with that team.
Very exciting working with the high school science teachers. They have a vast variety of interests and are very learner centered. And this spring, they put out a survey with their learners and wanted to know what courses, what are your topics of interest if we were able to revise the courses we offer and offer new ones. And they received remarkable data, which in turn created courses that are in our new program of studies. It's very good. We've been really focusing on the high school level, grade 11 SAS data in science. We are discovering that there's a significant need for targeted instruction beyond the middle and early high school years, but really in the upper level sciences in experimental inquiry and designing experiments and following through. So we're really focusing on how we can implement that in our classrooms and in our instruction on a regular basis. The new course, Earth and Space Science, very exciting. One of the PLCs, we spent time thinking about what are the most important learning goals based upon Common Core, the New Hampshire standards, and also New Hampshire SAS data. And it came down to us just putting all the topics on a chart and waiting for that, the topic, the real driving essential question for this course to speak to us. It was quite an exciting moment, and it did. And I'll leave the topic for mystery until it's in draft form, but a real thinking and analyzing process, thinking from the viewpoint of the learners rather than, well, I think we need to teach this. A real mind shift for all of us. Very exciting.
I'll just keep continuing on to the creative arts team.
Oh, the creative arts team. Now this team is blowing up with excitement. Not only do they have a plethora of new courses this year, they have a renewed energy, and PLC time is spent devoted on really driving down into those learning progressions and creating I can statements. For the visual and performing arts, it's much more difficult to create a standards-based rubric of performance. It's easier when you can measure on a paper pencil or a digital test, but when someone is playing the trumpet, how do you really determine, is that person proficient, above, or challenged, or whatever? So we've been really working on that. And what's exciting is that with the art and the music teachers is they have become so excited that they are now becoming teacher leaders and helping each other and reaching out to other teachers, helping. It's all about creating teacher leaders who are excited about teaching and learning, which directly impacts our learners. And that's happening in this team.
You want to do
You can
STEM
do the
also?
You can do the step, STEAM.
So STEM, STEAM, a lot of their time this year in PLCs went back to looking at the curriculum requirements for different STEM pathways. And again, gauging learner interest based on this first year of many of the courses. So they've spent a lot of their time drilling into the learning targets and realigning their pathways for making sure that those sort of unfold in a way that learners can access. That's how we ended up with the sustainability and computer science pathways really getting firmed up with more courses and learning goals throughout the course of this year.
And I'll talk a little bit about the counseling team. So like the other departments, we've spent some time with the PSAT and MAPS testing, and we are looking at it through the lens of the learner. So we've talked a lot about how teachers are looking at it to inform instruction in the classroom. We want to help our learners take that information and learn more about how it can help engage them in their learning, engage them in post-secondary planning, what that looks like. And so you can see number 3 talks about some in-class lessons. So for example, we went into all of the English classes and talked about the PSAT results and talked to learners about how they can be college and career ready, but not just looking at the scores in isolation, exploring all of the tools that are available on College Board to explore career options, and just lots of resources that are available. So we've been spending a lot of time looking at it from the lens of the learner. David and Heather already touched on this as far as looking at the social emotional piece of it. Once again, use this information. We've looked at attendance, we've looked at discipline, we've looked at teacher feedback, work habits, academic grades. And based on what we're seeing, we've been in the classroom doing lessons on community building, on kindness, on being good digital citizens. And it's been really great to be in the classrooms to work collaboratively with the students. Then we highlight what we're doing and share that out with the teachers. And so this is all done through our PLCs, all the groundwork for those things.
We have a lot of teams. I apologize.
We do a lot.
Heather?
Okay, for the world language, very exciting. We offer 3 languages, French, Spanish, and Mandarin. And when the world language team, we all gathered, we looked at the existing learning progressions and saw that we wanted to do much more with our learners. And now that we have world language offered in the middle school and the high school, we knew that we wanted a broader approach to our world language instruction. And this team has been really researching a lot of best practices for world language instruction and revising in draft form, learning goals, creating I can statements. We're just starting our work. This is going to be a multi-year step because for each language and then for each level of the language, there are a lot of details involved, but the team is very excited about this. In special education, the intensive learning center, special education teachers stepped up and wanted to really follow our learning progressions and start to begin to evaluate learner progress with the standards-based grade reporting system. So meshing that with the IEP goals and modifying general education learning goals so that it would be at the developmental and academic level of these unique learners is a challenge, but we are working on it. And that team is really looking to revise how we provide instruction to our learners. And it didn't show up. I'll talk about the wellness team too. The physical
the next
education
slide,
health
I think.
teachers.
Something, it's okay.
We've been working on developing, revising, and improving personal wellness plans with our learners. Again, revisiting those learning progressions based upon the most recent health and physical education data, and how to integrate wellness and physical education goals, all within the same course. Our 6th and 7th grade PE classes are no longer PE, physical education, they're wellness classes, where the health instruction and the physical activity instruction is all integrated. And that is something new we're working on.
I just want to also share before we move into the next couple of things and then turning over to the elementary schools. One of the big impacts of PLCs, even now, and we haven't, the middle high school has a lot of work to do. We're going to talk about that in a couple of slides. There's areas we know we need to continue to do growth. But one of the immediate impacts of having teacher leaders who are passionate about leading their teams, having the time for them to do this collaborative process and building skill. I mean, there's a lot of time that Heather has spent working with teams, pulling data, that Kim has spent working with teams, teaching them how to use that data alongside Heather. The immediate impact of that is much broader than even the stuff we've listed here. We have 5 teams at this point in the middle high school who have asked, based on what they're seeing with this data, to jump in full-fledged next year with using our learning management system fully, which is Otis, and using the 1 through 4 learning scales for reporting grades, which is something that's been, in our policy and the direction we're moving for quite some time. And that prompting to make that big leap of faith and do that professional learning together came from seeing where these gaps in what they're doing in the classroom with these older systems are creating versus where they want to go with the skills and knowledge for learners. And that wouldn't have come to them had they not been doing this intensive work together. So I just wanted to put that out there because that's not so obvious, but it is a big impact coming from this day-to-day sort of small work that takes place here. So I just want to spend a quick minute talking again, because we're way behind on MTSSB. So this is where we're at with that process using our current PLC structures.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the school-wide team. So on Wednesdays, members of the school counseling team actually join grade level teams to talk about learner concerns. And these are learners where maybe we're seeing continued behavioral issues, struggles in academics, where maybe we need more than what we would consider a tier 1 universal support. And so through those team meetings, or anybody in the building can make a referral if they're worried about a learner. We pull together some information. We know that behavior doesn't stand alone, right? So if kids are acting out or struggling academically, there's often more to the story. There's something else behind there. What we really want to do is understand what that root cause is, so we can help support that learner make better progress, have more supports, make sure we're coming at it from that team approach, which includes the family, the parent guardian in that conversation, and definitely the learner in that conversation. So on Wednesday afternoons, we meet as a team. It's a pretty comprehensive team. It's the school counseling team, representatives from special ed, from administrators, from the administration here. Also teachers come to that. And this is an opportunity for us to look at file review information, discipline, academic progress, not just for this school year, but in the past. Are we seeing any patterns? David, you talked about all of a sudden a learner could have increased absences, or all of a sudden grades aren't not good. And so really kind of figuring out where we might be able to put in some additional interventions and supports. Any learner that's been referred to the school-wide team stays on our list until we feel like we have a solid plan in place and the learner seems to be making good progress. So that could mean that we talk about a learner 2 weeks in a row, or it could mean that a learner stays with us in conversation throughout the whole entire school year. So it's totally student learner driven. And I think we've made a lot of really good progress with supporting learners and families when they are faced with some challenges both in and outside the classroom.
So we'll skip this. You can read it on your own if you'd like, but we've already addressed the data that's on the slide. So we'll just jump to the last one for our side of things, which is looking at where we're looking at growth, what our growth areas are for the next couple of years. Right now, we don't have a strong base of school-wide systems, such as research-based rubrics that we can consistently apply across teams, or protocols that are consistently in use to drive the PLC process in a recognizable way from one team to the next. So this year, the focus has been on building that foundation and seeing success and building that teacher leader capacity. Next year, we start looking at some of those system-wide pieces and making sure that we adapt things that the elementary folks are having success with, so it's consistent across all of the teams. Yes.
I'm just curious, when you have protocols, are you using like the Critical Friends type of protocols, or did you develop others? That's
We've pulled,
or pull from every.
yeah, there's a particular protocol data bank, and we've used it in other district sort of pieces. I can't remember. I think it's a school reform initiative or something
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
the Critical Friends.
Yes, so we pulled the Critical Friends from there. They have some data analysis protocols that are about looking at assessments in particular and having conversations around that. So we really tried to expose teachers to a lot of those protocols over the last couple of years. And now they know that's a resource and sort of how those work. But getting a consistency with that is
Yes.
still a need.
And some people are more comfortable than others.
Right,
So,
right.
I
And
think
we're very jealous, and we'll continue to be jealous when we see the elementary principals presenting the rubrics and things that they're using, because we need that more at our end of things too. The data analysis skill is something we are continuing to work on. You know, that it's hard pulling data and really having a critical look at that. And so again, this year was about exposure, letting the teams work through data in ways that they're comfortable with and having them see some success doing that. Next year, we start with, again, building some of that particular skills around different types of data. Cross-discipline school-wide focus, again, maybe making some school-wide goals for our PLCs that match some of the initiatives that we as a district think are important is something we'd like to see more of. And more training for our team leaders so they can continue to gain confidence in facilitating PLCs and reaching the goals that the team is setting. So again, this year we've seen some success. Next year, we want to sort of turbocharge that with more facilitation for our teams. So we're really proud of what our teams have done in a really difficult year and are continuing to do, but we are fully acknowledging where we have some more room to grow. So.
And I would say at the elementary level, we probably have those same growth areas. I suspect all teams do, because it's a continuous improvement process.
Right.
always growing.
All right, well, at the elementary level, we did start out the beginning of the year introducing what's our vision for PLCs, and we've had teams that have met previous years, so it's a matter of trying to regroup and say, what's our focus? You know, we're trying to fine tune this, we're trying to improve it, how can we do that? So we did we've done really long rubrics or self-assessments in the past, and we found a one-pager that we felt like, okay, we can really use this. It can be actionable. So I don't know if you'd like to click on either one of those pink links here works. So the one we presented in August as we gathered has the essential areas in it, and teams started to look at that. They started to just kind of do their first star of where are we at on this. If you scroll down, Nick, there are some examples. I think these are from RMS of where different teams, initially rated themselves.
And what's interesting with these ratings is that some of the teams are new. We had some staff shift to different grade levels last year. So it was really interesting to sit with all the teams and see where they were at. So if you keep scrolling down, Nick, you can see I took names off and grade levels off. So, but you could get an idea, the stars are where they felt they were at. And, in all areas, there's definitely room to grow.
So we did discover as we used this that it had some language that was specific to the system we borrowed it from. And since we're not in Jakarta, we are in the process of.
But apparently they have really good PLCs.
They have really good systems. Yeah. So we should all be Jakarta. So we are just editing it, not to change the content, because then it wouldn't be apples to apples, but just to use our own language and take out their references. And so we are using that, teams taking a look at it mid-year, end of year, and again, looking for that systemic continuous improvement. So we could go on to structures. So we're, as you all know, very jealous at the elementary level of time. Both schools have been able to build into their master schedule PLC meeting times. During the school day, we're continuing to analyze that. And I think it's fair to say it won't look exactly the same next year. Our teams at JGS, it's built in 40 minutes once a week. At RMS, it's more of a rotating. But then you might also have some staff meeting, so it plays out really to 2 to 4 times a month, which obviously makes a difference in how we utilize these teams. So at the elementary level, the team is focused on a group of students, really. It's being used less for delving into the curriculum than it obviously is at the high school for obvious reasons. And then our specialists also meet. There's obviously look a little bit different. There's I know at JGS sometimes is more of the social emotional because they share learners. So they might work together about developing common expectations or responses or helping each other with individual learners who are struggling. So team leaders do set the agendas, facilitate meetings, oversee the work. And then we each have a system in place for team leaders to meet with administrators and look at the big picture. Two exciting things for this year that have made a huge, huge difference. One, I can't stress enough, it's the first year ever we've had stipends for team leaders at the elementary school. We have very polite staff members, so it's hard for somebody who doesn't have an official duty or role or title to come in and say, and it did happen, but somebody would take on the setting the agenda, but it's very different when somebody has put their hand up and accepted a stipend for this. So that's been huge and we are so appreciative of it. And then the other is our early release days. So far, we've only had 2, but I think I would speak personally saying that last early release day I probably had more teachers comment to me, that was a really good day. That was a really good, then I'm not sure. Then often is the case. Let's just put it that way. And I did want to share, we wanted to share an example. So our January early release day or workshop was grade levels they were given certain questions to explore around the topic of writing, but a lot of time to just talk and to compare and to see, what was going well in different schools. And their task ultimately was to create a common rubric that could be used in both schools. So I was really excited to hear 3rd grade team leader at JGS say, oh yeah, we all just across the district, we all just administered the same writing prompt and we're using our rubric that we created to score it. And oh, they had this resource and we had the, so it really was an example of how a bit of time can go a long way in that unity and collaboration that we want to see. Want to talk?
Sure, love to talk. So, and I think to piggyback a little bit on that is the fact that they're doing this work, but that essence of time and that need to have more time to collaborate is something that we have to try and figure out how to do that a little bit more, because they gave the assessment, and they really, to look at it across the district would be really interesting to have them do. So This slide is about just some examples of the data that we look at when we're at PLCs. So grades 3 and 5 have the New Hampshire statewide assessment system, the standardized test. MAPS are grades 1 through 5 in math and reading. Zern is our math program. They have assessments there, the reading benchmarks that test accuracy, comprehension, and fluency. Some grade levels, not all, do a monthly math check and time math facts for fluency. RAS Kids is a tool they use also for reading comprehension. And then a lot of focus, at least at RMS this year, has a lot on writing, and at JGS as well. So that's some of the data that they look at. So the best practices for PLCs, usually the guiding questions, there are 4 essential questions for PLCs. They're written by DeFore and DeFore. And they're pretty basic. What do we want all learners to know and be able to do? How do we know if they learn it? How do we respond if they don't learn it? And then how do we extend for those learners that are already proficient at this? How do we extend it for those learners? So that's kind of the underlying premise for all PLC work. And for both the elementary grade level PLCs, the beginning of the school year, we all sat down and just established group norms, such as starting and ending on time, having a timekeeper, asking positive questions, all the different kinds of norms you can have. So that was established for each grade level, and they vary for each different PLC. So then at RMS, we did some goal writing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then they're working to develop common assessments and looking at student work, and then trying to determine the next instructional steps for our students.
So to give you some examples of PLCs in action, which is, I think, the title of the book, but
Is it?
it works for this too.
Pretty sure it is.
Yeah, it is. I'd have to say the exercise of writing out these slides was very affirming for me, because it's easy to sort of go about your day by day and you're rushing in, you're rushing out, and putting it all together. It was like, oh, wow, this is exciting. So school-wide, we started the year with looking at some of our standardized assessment data that we have, and I asked teams to look both back at the spring before, and so anyway, I guess we only had the spring before at that time, but I asked them to look at the students they had now and look at their former students that they sent on, so they could see what they were receiving, but also we look back on last year curriculum wise, what seemed to work, what seemed to be gaps that we suspect would be the same this year if we don't change our practice. So we adapted a protocol that was from that school reform and utilized that across the board. Built into the schedule, we have a win block, what I need, and with the goal being pulling in Learning Center teachers, Title I teachers, classroom teachers, and giving them the opportunity to all group and regroup students and do that flexibly across classrooms. So teams, again, as we said before, developing targeted assessments. And I think one thing that we've emphasized is not always doing big assessments, but narrowing it down, focusing on something that's really actionable. So in the fall, starting with that key question about, you've received these new students, think about what are things that are like really core things that you want them to be coming in with, and how do you find out who's coming in with it and who isn't. So some grade level specifics. At kindergarten, of course, they're starting out letters and sounds and phonemic awareness, being able to hear things and words. And their discussion was great because it led them then to do some research into resources that could be used and led them into thinking about how much time do I actually allocate for this in the classroom. So it's an example, I think, of the team is focused on something and suddenly you start seeing a different level of instruction in the classrooms because of it. And they are kind of trying to work specifically on if we take a group for 6 weeks and really work on this, what's the impact in analyzing that? Grade 1, it's not that they've done more, it's just the way the sizing on the slide is. Again, they looked at, beginning reading words of DOG, WIN, and doing some assessment around that so that they could group and regroup for tier 2 instruction. A great thing there is that their discussions have led to some teachers actually going in and doing model lessons for each other, which is something that hasn't often happened. So one of our teachers did Orton Gillingham training over the summer. She went into each first grade classroom, probably more than once, and modeled a sequence of instruction that Orton Gillingham uses for short vowel sounds, and has gotten other people to go, oh yeah, that looks good. Let me try that too. OGAP is ongoing assessment project, and it is a training that over the last couple of summers, we've had a number of teachers go to throughout the elementary school. Last summer it was sponsored by the state, maybe both summers by the state, heavily used in Vermont. It has things like a question or a bank of questions that you can administer and then really analyze together. So they've done some piloting with that. I'd say they're just dipping into that, but they're trying to look at their assessment differently. Certainly first grade's always done things like math fact fluency, but how can they assess in a slightly different way? They haven't yet dipped into that cross class groupings, but they're on the verge of it, I'm told today. Grade 2, again, size of font, no indication of the amount of work. Their team leader has done a number of OGAP trainings, so they have used that and analyzed it together, which is a great way of disseminating that PD. They early on, or fairly early on, did a common writing sample, used a progression to score it on the 1 to 4, and then looked at, okay, let's look at all the 1s. What are common things we need to work on there? Let's look at all the 2s so that they could start to personalize within their classrooms and within small groups what they were working on. And they pretty much right away started grouping across classrooms for win time. 3rd grade, I walked in today, they had their end of mission assessment for Zern. They're looking at it and like, well, we're going to get an overall and then we're going to delve into certain questions and, analyzing that. I think other grade levels use spreadsheets too, but they are good about that. And again, they were the team that has really coordinated with Ringe on their writing prompt and so on.
While you're switching slides, I have to say that this is like a quasi PLC going on because as you're talking about things, I'm noticing us looking them up over here. Like we just looked up OGAP and we're all like eyeballing it
I know,
together.
I should have written that out probably.
So that's kind of funny. I just had to point that out.
This is the kind of team you have, Mr.
4th and 5th grade at JGS for a couple of years has functioned as one PLC. We have a multi-age 4th, 5th grade class, so that's one reason. But also they are they're kind of team in mind. And it's interesting at the beginning of, I think they in some ways feel like, oh, we haven't done as much as others, but at the beginning of the year, they ended up focusing on and spending some time discussing something that wasn't delving into a specific skill, was about these kids we can have a class discussion, you know, whether it's because some are coming back from remote and others have been here, or they've been in smaller groups, or they realized, you know, there's such value in being able to have a class discussion and that back and forth discourse, and it was really hard. So they spent some time developing a self-reflection tool that all the learners completed about themselves. And then they looked at that as far as, well, how can we support things we're seeing as weaknesses? How can we help kids gain self-awareness if they're maybe not being accurately reflective? So they started out with that, went into developing a common assessment of some core math understandings that you want kids to have by 4th, 5th grade. But if there are gaps in them, they're going to make a huge difference in them being able to take on the next level of mathematics. So they started there and developed an assessment to analyze that. And then, you know, they're moving into the writing more now at this point. And they've really specifically noted we have a lot of that they have a lot of expertise on the team, and they don't always have the opportunity to learn from each other. So they are, you know, making sure they do that in a purposeful way.
Is that me?
Yep.
All right. So when we started with those self-assessments for the PLCs, something we all noticed that we were very low on was the goal setting. So that's something that at RMS we started with. So all the grade levels, you know, we met and discussed, well, you know, what are some of those non-negotiables we really want for our students. Some of the goals are written like the SLOs we used to have, the student learning objectives, right? That's what it those slows. So each grade level, I won't read through every single one of them, but this year there was a lot of focus on the writing, which is something I think at the elementary level I've noticed, and probably many others, that it's just an area that we really need to work on at the elementary level. So that's something a lot of teams took upon, was that goal of writing. Mostly those 3 genres of opinion, persuasive, informational, and narrative. So as I said, so kindergarten has the reading, you know, identifying lowercase letters, and the writing piece. And that one is, if you know kindergartners, and the writing is very interesting. So there's also like the drawing component. So part of the rubric for the kindergarten is making sure the picture kind of matches the words. So they were assessing, going over some of the assessments that they had, and it was interesting because some of the teachers they're like, well, I know what they wrote here because they told me. I said, well, if you're someone that doesn't know that child, is that really the correct score for them? So we had some really good conversations about being, you know, objective when looking at student work. So, and then grade 1, they were talking about reading levels. So reading growth and math is that one of those non-negotiables for fluency with addition and subtraction. Grade 2, again, was more about the regrouping, some of those non-negotiable skills that 2nd graders should have. And then again, another writing goal. Grade 3 is another one of, when we worked with Mahesh, there were a lot of non-negotiables that he mentioned for us to really focus on. So that was the multiplication and division. And they were reading goal as well. And then 4th grade changed it up a little bit. They are definitely focusing on the writing as well, but they also wanted to focus on some habit of mind through the use of STEM projects. So because they felt they were noticing for their students some of that social emotional learning that they felt was an important component to focus on for the school year. And then the 5th grade is the math. They have monthly math checks that assess all the areas and progressions for 5th grade in math. So they are checking those with monthly math checks. And then the writing curriculum as well. They have another writing. So some updates on what they've been working on the past few months. Again, kindergarten, they're working on writing. Something else they noticed is that when they gave the assessment, the writing prompt, that some teachers gave a little bit more instruction than another teacher. So they're also coming up with scripts to read. So when they give a writing assessment, they're not giving them too much information or not enough. And so it's kind of more fair. So there's all equal playing field. And then they are looking, although they do have the writing and the reading, they were looking at math. At the elementary level, we have to look at all grade level, all topics. So they have been looking at some of the math mission statements and looking at data to form some intervention groups for our kiddos. Grade 1, they're working on how-to writing prompts, the Zern assessments, and we have and their reading groups. And then the map data. We recently took the winter maps test for reading and math. So grade levels are starting to look at those a little bit, but there's still a lot of students for a variety of reasons. You could probably understand. We have sometimes students that are out for long periods of time, so we still have to finish up the testing. So that's not completely done yet. Grade 4, they are also looking at map data currently, working on narrative writings, and also just pre-assessment and post prompts for writing. And then 5th grade, I feel like I skipped. No, okay, sorry. And then 5th grade, so they have their monthly math checks that they're looking at. And then they're looking, kind of comparing that also to the Zern program and lessons, to making sure that if there's any gaps between, they can reteach any skills necessary. And they're also working on the writing and the rubrics and looking at the New Hampshire SAS writing modules. So that's something I think we'll also focus on a little bit more for grades 3 through 5. There are some, it's not the benchmark, there's modules and interim, thank you, assessments for the New Hampshire SAS. So that's something we would like to do more with that as well. So did these get mixed up today? I missed 2, 3. It looks like, yeah. I was like, did I miss grade levels? Because I feel like I'm losing my mind. So we're gonna go back a little bit. So grade 2, again, writing and looking at map scores, but again, they're not all finished. And then grade 3, the writing again and creating universal topic and passage, and then looking at trying to finish out the scope and sequence for the rest of this year. So I apologize for that mix up there. I thought I was like, did I see that? Losing my mind. All right. So we can just go to the last slide. So, based on, as we meet as a leadership team, we were talking about, now that we have these team leaders and the need for additional PLC training, which we feel that I've heard it at RMS, like we just need more training, like what's it supposed to look like, and just more guidance. So we found this virtual summit. It's a PLC at Work. It's by Solution Tree. They're well renowned for their work with PLCs. So there's a 3-day workshop, and we're sending, thanks to Ruben who wrote a grant, we're sending about 16 staff members throughout the district for all the way through to attend this professional development. So we're really excited about that, and it's virtual, which is nice, and we don't have to send people to, I think it was Hawaii was the one, that was the other one.
It seems like there must have been a grant for that.
Very motivating as well, though.
Yeah.
And I think that's all we have.
I don't know if you have questions or comments.
I'm impressed, and I'm also pretty overwhelmed. That's a lot of stuff. Yeah, I had a. From a board perspective, you guys are on trenches. You're doing all this stuff, and you're doing it for a purpose of having an end result. How would that end result manifest itself at the board level? What should we see that's going to be different?
I mean, I'll speak a little bit to, I guess, one of our needs in the middle high school that we've been cognizant of, and we've talked about it, you know, since I've been here, is translating more of the learning that's taking place in the classroom onto what learners can transfer onto things like standardized assessments, just as an example, or into learning further down the road that helps them on whatever path they're going to. So I would expect this work pretty quickly at the board level for you to start seeing improvements, for example, in standardized assessment scores. I would not hazard a guess of what that's going to look like percentage-wise one year to the next, but I can already tell just looking at the interim assessments that focused work that the teams are doing is leading to learners getting more of the information and transferring that to those assessments, you know, in a more positive way. I think we'll start to see at the board level more opportunities for personalizing learning, which is something that I know is a district goal that the board sometimes checks in on and things like that. You know, it was resonating with me when you were talking about crossing classrooms based on PLC, sort of what I need time based on what teams are seeing. I think that translates, you know, to what all of us are kind of seeing down the road, which is more opportunities to look at data together, decide on the best approach, and then personalize that for learners based on what these teams are doing. So I don't know if that's making sense, but I think those are two things that I could put my finger on pretty quickly.
So at least we've got two things for our dashboard, which we're going to have at some point.
I would add to that, I'm not sure how this would be measured exactly, but I think building teacher leadership, building sense of shared efficacy, and, you know, both of those certainly are going to impact the standardized assessments or, you know, satisfaction levels, you know, both of employees and of the learners.
And one more thing, if I could, now latching onto what you just said, I think our teachers, it's hard to pin down specific things to say, I'm proud of this particular work that we're doing. And that, you know, every teacher is proud to be a teacher and you're proud of your students, but it's hard to translate that into concrete things that you can share out and say, look what we've done, you know, to improve learning for our kids. And what's been striking me every time our team leaders share out, and now hearing all the list of things that your team leaders are doing, and what we're getting to, which the board will see and get to experience with us, is teachers having concrete things to sort of hang their hats on and say, I know that what we're doing is good work because look at these pieces that we've collaborated on together that's improving the lives of our kids. And that's what strikes me. And I think, you know, down the road, I hope that's what the board will get to see and experience more of too.
So I'm also thinking that I'm not sure exactly how it might be seen at the board level, but I would be thinking that you guys would be seeing and feeling just an increased, I want to say professionalism, but I don't want to say our teachers are professional or haven't been professional. But what I mean is there's really this focused professional conversation happening. And I would think that that conversation would continue to be happening, not just in these groups, but just in the day-to-day kind of passing conversations that are happening. And then I'm also imagining if that's happening, what the impact is for the children, that their whole thing is going to raise up a bar, you know, raise the bar on this. I find that exciting.
So, you know, once a student exceeds their expectations and achieves, does well on standardized tests or whatever for them, they develop a sense of pride.
Mhm.
That sense of pride translates throughout the community. So I think one of the things the board will see is we'll see that, gee, people are telling us that we have an elite school system and people want to send their children there. So I think that's a very positive thing that can result. I had one more question, which was, what can we do to support you? What do you need from the Ed Committee and the board?
Well, I think having this grant money to go to this summit is wonderful. That certainly is a great support. I would anticipate some summer work, especially for team leaders, maybe for teams themselves. So that is something that obviously we would need financial support to do.
And I think preserving and continuing to pay the team leaders is really, really important. You know, it's that professional conversation piece that you talked about, Marcia, I think is what I was sort of trying to pin down too. And as you had said, Susan, giving that acknowledgement to the person running that, I think is a really big deal. And continuing to make sure we have time, you know, with our teams to do that. The half days at the elementary schools, the common planning times at the middle high school. I mean, having that time consistently is so critical to the teams getting into the work and then continuing to do it and expand it out into other areas. And I would probably anticipate more training down the road, you know, in the next couple of years for teachers.
So I have a question. So if we, you know, what we're talking about here, more training and increased professionalism and middle leaders and, you know, that type of stuff. So does it come a point where we reach a level where actually people come to us to learn our methods
That would be
and
nice.
how we do
Yeah.
them?
Great.
I mean, because
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, because that becomes a revenue. That, you know, it's a way of generating money.
Given that our teachers in this district are accomplishing the things that they're doing this year in this environment that we've been in, this has been a harder year in many ways than last year was. And
Yes.
again,
I think we all know that.
I'm blown away every time I hear our teachers in the middle high school talking about what they're doing with these PLCs and talking together and sharing, and then hearing again that it's elementary schools are the same way. I think we really do have exceptional teachers and exceptional interest among those teachers of doing what's best for learners. And if they can do this in this type of a year with minimal training and a foundation that we're building, you know, who knows in a few years where they'll be if we continue to support them and make sure that they're getting what they need.
Well, I'm thinking the team leaders now, yes, they get a stipend and they're, you know, get training and so on. But there is courses out there
Mhm.
that trains them to become trainers
Right.
of this. And I'm thinking that might be another level. And again, that would be something that could really help our district, both from kind of just PR perspective and our value. It helps build our people because people are asking them, how
Right.
do you do that? You're really, you know, that, so it builds up that. But then there's also the whole revenue stream that can come from that.
So I also, I know that each community is different. And each community has a different, places a different value on education. And so I think that our district has a very big challenge relative to some other districts in terms of achieving equity in SAS, for example. Because there are certain factors that drive the test results. First factor is the teacher, of course, but there are other factors relative to income, families, and so forth. And so I think that from our community perspective, our teachers are a little bit more challenged. but that just makes it a bigger accomplishment, right, when we move forward and accomplish the things that you guys are working on. So I think the challenge is great in this community, but I also think that the rewards are great.
Agree.
So normally we don't have public comments because normally there isn't public, but I'm wondering if we should allow public comment. If we publish it.
The public-
Person from the public.
It's a lot of pressure for you. Public person.
I
She
didn't-
has to state her name and the town she's
I did not
from.
know that she was public. I thought we had 3 board members.
She's not officially on that committee, so. but- so.
I would welcome your input.
I was actually quiet for an
Introduce
hour
yourself,
and a
please.
half. This
You
is
have
a
to say your name.
uh,
and your
Patty
town.
Farmer Jaffrey, even on, because you can't really hear it. Okay,
Right
so this is a really great moment and I'm super glad I came today because this sort of does a big full circle to before I was even on the board. And I am so proud of all of you. And I think it's just, as a parent, really, really rewarding to watch the evolution happen over that period of time, knowing how much work has been done and how much effort has been put in. And I wouldn't use the word change because change often has a really negative connotation and people are like, oh, this was that thing we did 10 years ago and then we didn't do it for 3 years and then we did something else. But an evolution, and I think with the progressions and the vision that was stated, and this is all really coming together. And I almost feel like a lot of times, Charlie, we talked a lot about rigor, and I'm not as impressed about rigor anymore. I'm impressed about consistency, and not about homogeneous consistency, but that students can know what they're going to do and get really quality instruction, and they're going to grow in ways that makes the teachers want to thrive and grow themselves. And I just see that today. I can see it. I wish there was like a really fun infographic-y kind of way for that any parent could see that, because they're not, right? They're just going to see the grades. They're going to see a happy kid or sad kid or a kid that liked the French fries today, but, or not, or whatever, or whatever. But that's what, if there was just some way for people to appreciate it and what we're giving the kids, and you're giving the kids, I say we, it's not me. So I just want to say thank you and I wasn't planning on coming here to thank you, but I guess I really am. Because I think it's something that will have a profound effect. We are developing a community of learners, and how we expand upon that and how we engage families and engage the community in that is really critical. I wish everybody could have had this presentation and the teachers could participate in it. So thank you very much. That was really instructive, and I've learned a lot in the last few years. So thank you.
Ruben wants to. Yeah. What's that? Well, I was gonna say it.
I'm just asking if I could speak.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I have some observations and I guess some questions. And one of the observations on the slides was the 2 to 4 came up a couple times, or 2 to 3, but then in conversation, David, you had said 2, like sometimes 4, and that was in reference to the frequency of the times that people meet. And then there was the word afterwards, or the phrases, times a week, 2 to 4 times a week, 2 to 3 times a week in one place, and then 2 to 4 times a month at another location. What I'm interested in is you talking about maybe from the elementary standpoint, what if you had 2 to 4 times or 2 to 3 times a week, or at least somehow the equivalence of that throughout the course of the year, what would that do? And then, and maybe just as a part of that conversation, what you mentioned it's important to keep that time. What do you think would happen if it were less?
Oh.
Well, obviously, anytime I feel like we've ever surveyed educators about what do you need to improve, time is the first thing they say. And I know at elementary level, we really struggle with that, obviously. And we've had similar kinds of we used to call our team meetings RTI meetings, response to intervention, or response to instruction. And we've tried things like having it from 2:30 to 3:30. This year, it's more embedded into the day, which means it's, you're leaving your class instructional time to attend it. So the hard thing in the elementary day about increasing times per week is it means you're decreasing instruction unless we can somehow increase our time available to us.
Did she just say length of the day? I'm not sure.
But I think even if trying to do that and trying to find coverage, so even some of our PLC meetings, the special educators can't always attend because they're with students. So there's always some, concerns that come up when trying to make sure everyone can get together at the same time. And we've tried at RMS various scheduling, staff meeting one week, PLC the next week. This week, this year we embedded it in the day as well. And I think staff have varying opinions on that. So I think they're going to be looking at that.
Right.
We have a principal advisory council at RMS, and they're going to start looking at different ways to have some scheduling for next year and see if we can do that. But I agree, Ruben, 100%. If they had more time, just like that kindergarten example I gave, we were just getting started and they're like, oh, we got to go get our kids from special, and I was like, I want to keep doing this. It was because it was so fun and it's so eye-opening. But that it's tricky at the elementary level for sure.
Boy, I think, I don't know. I think if we had less time to work with, I think you're drawing out any sort of a process a lot longer, obviously. A lot of the value that we've had in having those consistent times every week is we can spare the time to have Kim and Heather come in, which has happened quite frequently, and sit down and say, okay, here's how we look at this data. Let's talk about what you're seeing and sort of guide them through the use of that data. But that still leaves them another 1 or 2 days that week to then take what they've practiced the previous day with, in this case, Heather and Kim, and use it with, looking at learners and things like that and start making some plans. So I think what's been serving them well is having that consistent time so they can start a process, continue it, measure it. It's giving them that continual flow. I think if you cut that back, it's a start-stop sort of situation, and you're drawing out the length of time for improvement probably substantially.
I would imagine engagement wouldn't be as high.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
It's very exciting to go, it happened to me today, to go into a classroom, a PLC meeting, and have the teacher say to me, look what we've done since last week. Look at the changes we've made. And that's happening more and more and more. And what a tragedy it would be is if we didn't have that.
And sorry, no, go ahead.
It really took us, honestly, several weeks at the beginning of the year to change our patterns, because faculty meeting or team meeting times are always very like a grocery list. We have to do this, instead of just, okay, we're going to think, collaborate, discuss, create. And it took a while for everyone to get into that different mindset. And if we only had that every other month or whatever, I don't think any amount of growth would really, really benefit our learners.
And we've been able to sort of take that PLC concept and with maybe less data because it's harder to do this in larger groups, but our staff meetings on Tuesdays, we've consciously, based on feedback from the staff, we no longer do list of items. If it's something that could have been on a list, we send it by email now. All of our staff meetings have some core focus at this point because we've consistently tried to model that collaborative discussion approach. And then every 5th or 6th Tuesday, we have teachers sign up to lead sessions with each other based again on what we're seeing as gaps in teacher knowledge and things like that. And we call them our Learning Tuesday sessions, but it's modeling that peer collaboration amongst colleagues and leadership. And that's gone really well. But again, it's because we have the time to do the PLCs at other times that we've been able to do those other pieces too. And on the flip side, it's also why we explain to the teachers in our buildings, no, you don't get a half day because the elementary folks need more half days to get the time that you're getting. So that's why we're sticking with, kids being here on those days. You already have that time sort of baked in.
And we're seeing that the PLCs really are a training ground for our teacher leaders,
Yep.
who then feel the confidence to lead even a larger group of peers in the Learning Tuesdays. And it's become a real success.
So I have a kind of a what if. So it sounds like to varying degrees, for whatever reason, the teachers are finding success with their learning community. And so I guess my question is, and maybe some's already happened, I don't know, but this way of learning, has any of that translated to the classroom in terms of how they structure learning for the students? So have they tried making learning communities within their classroom? Is my question. And if not, imagine if.
I think some have. I mean, we've been in observation land the last few weeks quite a bit, but so you can see some elements of it happening where teachers are doing more of having like what the 6th and 7th and 8th grade teams were doing, saying, well, here's how you look at data, here's how you set goals. You can see that filtering into some of those classrooms where they'll pause and have a wrap-up session and have them looking together. Where are you at this week? Let's talk about the next steps. A lot of teachers pulled from a colleague teacher this concept of having, they project up like a display that talks about what do you need today? Here's the goals. Here's how we'll reflect at the end of class. So it kind of mirrors that process of starting things out, doing the instruction and circling back. And that came from a teacher based on some of this stuff. I think there's still more room to grow with that, but you can see that, again, that learning community model starting to filter into some classrooms as people become more confident with it.
And I'm seeing just the opposite, where when the teachers are using the language such as formative practice, feedback, summative assessment, I'm seeing that applied during the professional learning communities.
So
with the
they're
adult
applying
learners.
that to themselves.
Right,
as
right.
well. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful.
Just one more comment.
Yeah.
It's my thought that special care on figuring out how to provide the supports, look at calendars or what have you. That will be 3 half days or whatever for the elementary schools to provide, increase the time for them to collaborate. Is I believe, I don't, that give people that quality time, to be able to do that, it enhances the time that they can have with their learners even more, so it increases the quality. Even sometimes the quantity can't be increased. But that would be to your question, what can we do? Still brainstorm around that. And I think that Kelly and Susan, how they figured out how to do anything on a day is amazing. Because an elementary schedule is very different than a secondary schedule. And so to find the time that they have done, it's fine, but then Susan said, this last release day, how people were commenting about, wow, can you imagine if they had the time to be able to have those conversations, unified, they would just do it. They would, and they would see that improvement, I think, happen. That's just the literature out there states would happen. as long as you have teacher leaders, and you've also said, that, first of all, maintain that teacher leaders and providing those financial support for them, and then recognition. And I'm sure.
Patty, was there one other comment you wanted?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, I'm stepping away from just PLCs for a minute, but to the format that we are here with the education committee of having topics and having presentations and recording them. Last night at deliberative session, there was a big conversation about the importance of transparency. And I think that this is an important piece to that. And having these available on our website so that people can see, and that the topics are, and maybe it needs to go in, one of your, emails that goes out to, this week, here's things that are happening. Maybe you say education committee meeting, it's be available if you can't attend, whatever. Something.
We're building up one COVID case, there'll be a lot of great things.
And then you can just let the COVID case thing
Yeah.
hopefully drop away, and let's just talk about, tune into the videos. You can see all the things that are happening and stuff like that. So I think this is really important. And appreciate all the work that you put into it, but I think it will reap its benefits.
Definitely.
So I guess, thank you all, and I think the meeting essentially we're done. But I do recognize that David, you and I was thinking Charlie maybe could just talk for a
Yep.
few minutes, planning, looking ahead.
Yep.
Okay.